Hi, I'm Pastor Kelly, coming to you from my favorite place to read. Recently, I reread this book. It's called Carry On, Mr. Bowditch by Jean Lee Latham. At one time, it was a literature assignment for one of my kids in our homeschool literature course. But it's a wonderful story about Nathaniel Bowditch. About the end of the American Revolution, he was a small boy. And his mother dies, and they had several children. And at the age of 12, his father, because he can't handle with all these children, and he basically signs Nathaniel up to be an indentured servant. Nathaniel felt like his life was over. He was a brilliant child. His teachers, up until that time, had literally thought he was a mathematical genius. They said this child needs to go to Harvard. He is so smart. But he becomes indentured, and he will not be free until he's 21. And by the age of 21, forget going to Harvard and going to college. You are much too old. A few things have changed since then, haven't they? But one of his friends says to him, "You've become becalmed." Well, I grew up here on the prairie. I don't know much about sailing terms and what they all mean. But Nate's reply to that was, "No, I'm not becalmed. I'll just sail by ash breeze." Here was a phrase that he uses throughout his life that I had no idea what it meant. Because like I said, I grew up here on the prairie. But to sail by ash breeze, or first we'll go back to be becalmed, is basically you got the wind knocked out of your sails. You're not going anywhere. When the sails are calm, that ship is not going. But that's when Nathaniel said, "No, I'm going to sail by ash breeze." At that time, most oars were made out of ash wood. So they would pull out the oars, even if there was no wind and their ship was going nowhere, they would begin to sail by ash breeze and begin to row. So while Nate was an indentured servant, he studied. Every book he could get his hand on, he befriended a doctor who loaned him many, many books. And in every minute of his free time, he studied and studied. He taught himself French, Spanish, Latin. He taught himself Latin just so he could read a book by, I believe it was Newton, and just learned so much. And then he taught himself like surveying and navigation. After he was done being an indentured servant, he signed on as second mate and clerk on a ship. And while he was out navigating the ship and lots of things I didn't understand in here, he realized there was a book that they would call the Almanac that they would sail by, and there was calculations that were wrong. Nathaniel ended up finding 8,000 calculations that were wrong, and men lost their lives because of that. In fact, his brother lost his life because of a wrong calculation in that book. So Nate set it out after coming home, after one of his journeys at sea, to write a book with the correct calculations. And he did, and it was published. And because of all his things, he even was given, believe it or not, a degree by Harvard, even though he never even stepped foot in a classroom at Harvard. See, Nate didn't let the circumstances of life that didn't go well for him stop him. He decided he was going to sail by ash breeze. And many of us can have the same thing happen to us. Sometimes life just doesn't turn out the way we had planned. But there is something we can do. In 2 Timothy 2:15, it says, "Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." You can study the word of God. God will give you direction. You can also study in your area of interest. Don't let your ship be becalmed and say, "Oh, this terrible thing happened and now there's no hope." That's not so. You can sail by ash breeze. Well, from the prairie and from my reading corner, this is Pastor Kelly encouraging you to sail by ash breeze.